The rain poured endlessly that morning, turning the busy expressway into a shimmering river of chaos. Car horns blared, engines roared, and headlights cut through the misty air. But in the middle of that storm, one small figure walked alone. A 5-year-old girl, barefoot, wearing nothing but a torn brown dress that clung to her tiny frame. Her cries were swallowed by the rain, but her mouth was wide open, her face twisted in fear and pain. She was too young to understand the danger of the rushing traffic or the cold that bit into her skin. On the opposite side of the road, a black SUV slowed to a halt. Its tinted windows rolled down, and a tall man stepped out, his expensive suit instantly soaked. He was a billionaire, known to the world for his wealth, but known to no one for the secret emptiness in his heart. He had lost his only daughter to illness 2 years ago, and since then, nothing had moved him, no charity, no business success, no smile from strangers. Until now, when his eyes fell on the child, something inside him broke. He didn't care that the rain was destroying his suit or that the cars behind him were honking. He ran to her, kneeling in the cold water pooling on the asphalt. The girl flinched as he reached for her hand. "It's okay," he said, his voice trembling. "I'm here, you're safe now." But she shook her head, her tiny body shivering violently. "My mommy," she sobbed. "Mommy sleeping. Not wake up." The man's heart clenched. Her words painted a picture he didn't want to see. A mother somewhere, lifeless, while her child wandered into the storm. He wrapped his coat around her small shoulders, shielding her from the rain. "We'll find her," he whispered, though deep down he feared the truth. As he carried her back to his car, Felix realized that in saving her, he was saving a piece of himself too. For the first time in years, his tears fell freely, mixing with the rain. And that was the moment the world's richest man understood. Sometimes, the greatest wealth is not in what you own, but in who you can hold in your arms when the storm comes. Felix sat in the back seat of his SUV, holding the little girl wrapped in his drenched coat. Her trembling had lessened, but her eyes stayed wide, darting toward the rain-streaked windows. "Where do you live?" he asked gently. She pointed toward the shanty rooftops visible beyond the highway. Her voice was barely a whisper. "Mommy, in the small house, sleeping, not moving." Felix's driver hesitated as they approached the area. The streets were narrow, flooded with muddy water. The smell of dampness and decay hung heavy in the air. When they arrived, the girl wriggled out of his arms and ran toward a wooden door hanging off its hinges. Felix followed, his heart pounding. Inside, the dim light revealed a woman lying on a thin mat. Her lips were pale, her chest still. The small room smelled of sickness and damp earth. The man didn't need a doctor to confirm. She had been gone for hours. The girl threw herself onto her mother's body, shaking her. "Wake up, Mommy. I'm back. Wake up." Felix turned away, tears stinging his eyes. Memories of his own daughter's lifeless body flashed before him. He wanted to help, to lift the girl away, but something made him pause. As his gaze swept the room, he noticed a photograph on the wall. It was worn, the edges curled, but the faces were clear. A much younger Felix stood beside the woman on the mat. His arm was around her shoulders, his smile wide. The shock hit him like a physical blow. He remembered her now. 6 years ago, she had been a house help in his home. They had grown close, too close, and one reckless night had changed everything. But the next morning, she had disappeared without a word. And then it hit him. The little girl was his daughter. His knees buckled. He had spent years drowning in grief for the child he lost, not knowing that another one had been walking under the same sky, struggling to survive. But the cruelest twist was yet to come. As he tried to take the girl into his arms, a group of rough-looking men barged into the room. One of them spat on the ground and glared at him. "You're too late, rich man. She's ours now. Her mother owed us money, big money. And you don't just walk away from that." The child clung to him, crying harder, but the men pried her away. Felix pulled out his wallet, offering stacks of cash, but the leader only smirked. "This isn't about money. This is about teaching the whole neighborhood a lesson. The girl goes with us. In that moment, the rain outside seemed to roar louder, as if the heavens themselves were mocking him. The SUV's engine roared in the distance, but Felix didn't move. He had all the money in the world, yet he was powerless to protect the only piece of himself left. And as the men disappeared into the storm with the little girl, his coat slipping from her tiny shoulders, Felix fell to his knees in the flooded street. He had found his daughter, only to lose her again. Felix could barely sleep that night. Rain still beat against his mansion's windows, but all he could hear were the fading cries of the little girl calling out, "Daddy, don't let them take me." That word, Daddy, had broken something in him. She didn't know the truth, yet somehow, her soul had called to his. By dawn, he was already in his SUV, driving back to the slums. His security team followed, and he had enough money in a suitcase to buy an entire block. But when he reached the woman's shack, it was empty, her body gone, the floor swept clean. He found an old woman who had seen what happened. "They took the child to Ibeji Island," she whispered, glancing around fearfully. "That's where they keep children like her, until they're sold." Sold. The word made his stomach twist. By evening, he was on a small boat, heading toward Ibeji Island with two of his most trusted men. The air was heavy, the water dark as oil. The island loomed ahead, scattered with dim lanterns and the faint sound of waves crashing against jagged rocks. When they arrived, they found a cluster of wooden huts. Inside one, Felix spotted her, sitting in a corner, knees to her chest, her eyes red and swollen. Relief flooded him, but it was short-lived. A tall, scar-faced man stepped out of the shadows. "You came," he said coldly. "I was wondering if the rich man would care enough to get his hands dirty." Felix set the suitcase on the floor. "Take it. Let her go." The man shook his head slowly. "You don't understand. Her mother was one of us. Once. She ran away, thinking she could hide. We don't just take money, we take blood." Before Felix could move, two men grabbed him from behind, forcing him to his knees. The scar-faced man crouched in front of the child. "This man is not who you think he is, little one. He's the reason your mother ended up here. Ask him." The girl's frightened eyes met Felix's. "Is it true? Did you hurt mommy?" His lips trembled. "No, no, my child. I." The man didn't let him finish. A flash of steel caught the lantern light. In seconds, chaos erupted. Shouts, gunfire, the smell of burning wood. Felix's men fought back fiercely, dragging him toward the door. But as they escaped into the storm, a piercing cry split the night. He turned, and saw the hut collapsing in flames. The girl was still inside. Every instinct screamed at him to run, but he tore himself free from his guards and charged into the fire. The heat clawed at his skin, the smoke burned his lungs, but he found her, huddled under a table, coughing, reaching for him. He pulled her close, shielding her as they stumbled toward the exit. But just as they reached the doorway, the wooden beam above gave way, crashing down on his back. Pain exploded through him, but he forced the child forward into the waiting arms of his men. His last sight was her tear-streaked face screaming his name. By the time they pulled him out, the rain had stopped, but so had his heartbeat. The little girl clutched his burnt coat as they laid him on the shore. She didn't understand that the man she had just met, the man who had died for her, was her father. Not yet. 10 years later. The streets were still wet from an afternoon storm, but the city had changed. Skyscrapers rose where old shacks once stood, and Ibeji Island was nothing but rubble, a place whispered about in cautionary tales. A young woman, now 13, stepped off a bus, her school uniform neatly pressed. Her name was Hannah. She was quiet, serious, and always carried an old, tattered coat in her school bag. The coat smelled faintly of smoke and rain, but she never let it go. She had been raised in an orphanage since that night. The men who had rescued her told her that a stranger had died to save her, but they never told her his name. One day, her history teacher assigned a project: research an important figure in the city's history. While searching through the public library archives, Hannah's eyes fell on an old newspaper from 10 years ago. The headline read, Billionaire Felix dies saving unknown child from Ibeji Island fire. Below it was a photograph, him, kneeling in the rain on the highway, his coat wrapped around a little girl. Around her. Her hands shook as she read the article. Details began to piece themselves together. The way he had held her, the way he had called her my child, the desperation in his eyes. At the very bottom of the article was a single, quiet sentence. Sources claim the child may have been his daughter, though the truth died with him. Hannah's vision blurred. She left the library in a daze, walking through the city until she found herself standing in front of a tall bronze statue, a memorial of Felix. Rain began to fall, just like that night. She placed the coat at the base of the statue, her voice breaking. "I remember your voice now," she whispered. "I remember the way you looked at me, and I'm sorry I didn't know." The rain soaked her hair, but she didn't move. For the first time in 10 years, she let herself cry, not for the mother she lost, but for the father she never truly had the chance to know. And as the storm raged, Hannah swore she would live a life worthy of the man who had given up everything to save hers. Because love, she finally understood, didn't always come wrapped in years. It could come in a single, rain-soaked night, and still last forever. 10 more years passed. Hannah was now 25, a strong, determined woman studying law at the University of Lagos. Her life was far from easy, orphans rarely had smooth roads, but Felix's story had become her compass. She kept his bronze statue photo in her wallet and his burnt coat folded neatly at the foot of her bed. But despite her calm appearance, Hannah carried a storm inside her. She had one unanswered question. The night Felix died, the men who had taken her, the ones who had started the fire, were never caught. Police had called it gang activity, nothing more. But Hannah remembered the scar-faced man. His deep voice still echoed in her nightmares. One rainy evening, as she walked home from class, she spotted a familiar figure leaning against a wall in the marketplace. The years had aged him, but the scar across his cheek was unmistakable. Her breath caught. It was him. She followed him quietly through the winding back streets until he disappeared into an old warehouse by the docks. Her hands trembled as she took out her phone. She could call the police. She could turn around. But then she thought of Felix, kneeling in the rain, shielding her from the fire, sacrificing himself. She couldn't walk away. Inside the warehouse, voices echoed. Hannah slipped behind a stack of crates and listened. "Felix's men should have stayed out of our business," the scar-faced man was saying. But that girl, she was the one who ruined everything. She lived. Hannah's rage boiled. She stepped out from hiding. "I didn't just live," she said, her voice shaking. "I grew strong enough to find you." The man's eyes narrowed, then widened in recognition. "The little street rat," he sneered. She reached into her bag, not for a weapon, but for the burnt coat. She threw it at his feet. "Do you remember this? It belonged to the man you murdered." "My father." His smirk faltered. "Your father?" Before he could finish, the sound of sirens filled the air. Hannah had already called the police before entering, sending her location. Armed officers burst into the warehouse, pinning the men to the floor. As they dragged the scar-faced man away, he spat in her direction. "You think this ends with me? You don't know the half of what your precious Felix was involved in." Hannah froze. "What do you mean?" But the man only laughed, disappearing into the flashing blue lights. That night, Hannah sat in her small apartment, staring at Felix's photograph. His warm smile seemed to hide something, a truth he had never told her. Was her father the pure hero she had always believed? Or was there a darker side to his life before that rainy night? The storm outside grew heavier, and for the first time, Hannah wasn't just mourning Felix. She was questioning him, and she knew she would have to dig into his past, no matter what she found.